Guys, we had a comment from a Mr. or a Mrs.
Or a miss. They could not be married.
A woman that's not married, that's impossible.
Sean, how dare you?
Are they really a woman if they're not married?
Okay, no.
This is my hot take. Misfit artists coming
We're
out.
gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going.
Gender
Stop.
roles with a violence never before seen.
Don't joke about that on the internet.
Wow. I still don't know if this was a dude or a dudette or anything in between. It was from Botsai126, and they asked if we can make a video on clothing. Clothing. Mostly the shading part. My life is hard. And clothing is also a difficulty. It is a time and a half.
Mm-hmm.
It is an essential part of drawing characters. Most art, you will have to tackle clothing. And if you look online, I feel like there is a few less tutorials on it.
Yeah.
And I think part of the main reason for that is why we haven't made a tutorial on it yet. And so this is going to be a pretty crummy tutorial, I'm going to be honest. Because my primary philosophy around clothing is just that it's part of character design, and I don't have any personal ways that you should handle it, especially shading clothing. But I do think that there are principles that you can consider. Ace, do you have any opening thoughts on clothes?
Not really. I think you hit the points right on the head.
So, and there's a few ways you can look at it. There's clothing in reference to animating clothing, because there's physics effects that you can think about. There's clothing when you're thinking about character design. There's clothing and how it relates to poses. So I'm going to try to do a very broad kind of go over as much as I can. But the big takeaway is going to be clothing is not just one thing, because there are multiple kinds of clothing. Most people, I think, when we're talking about how do you draw clothes, we're thinking of t-shirts, maybe a cape, cloth. And that's something that we could make a more detailed thing on, is very specifically cloth. But if you spend your whole time learning how to shade and render a blanket, to me that's, again, missing the point of clothing. Because clothing is an extension of the character design. It is an extension of physics effects in animation. It is, showing the physical state of a character. It is another part of the storytelling. And that's what's more important. At least to me, because different art styles and different artists will portray clothing in different ways. Maybe Ace or whoever's editing this can throw up a slideshow of very different art styles and how clothing looks.
Right.
Wow.
So
this is going to be one of those things where I'm going to talk about my philosophies around clothing and go over some of my stuff. But there's a lot of different artists. So if you want to learn how to draw like Gendy, don't ask me how to draw clothing. Look at how he draws clothing. If you want to draw clothing like in animes, look at anime.
Can I interject and say
No.
something? Wow, rude. I think one important thing, I don't know if you're about to touch on this or not, but if you want to draw clothing, look at actual references of people wearing clothes. Try and take note of the different shape language.
Look at people wearing clothes.
For me, a really great resource is to find Met Gala photos.
If you want to really see clothing, because if you want to draw ours hurt. If you want to draw crazy clothing, yeah, you don't look at anime and cartoons and how they stylize it, because you're not going to be studying clothing anymore. Look at high fashion and what they do, because you're going to see a lot of the things that can be done with different materials. And that was kind of my big thing, is especially when you're talking about shading it, it's less of a study of clothes and more of what do different materials look like. Because if you're doing like a Mad Max character design, you're not drawing traditional clothes. You're going to be drawing a lot of crazy makeshift stuff. So it's more about understanding different textures. If you're designing a character, then again, it's not important that you know how to draw fabric, cloth, 259. It's about how do you configure that to express the character?
Exactly.
And that's the first point I do have here is make sure that clothing expresses and informs about the character. Like I said, so if we look at the Demon Slayers, they all wear uniforms. That uniform symbolizes something about the characters. And you can take a lot of things away. It's relatively simple. It references traditional Japanese school and military uniforms. The capes on the Hashira are symbols of power because that's what capes do. This character, Craven Killclaw, I wanted the coat part to resemble a Gambison, which is this more fluffy type thing. So I tried to show some elements of padding on there, which is what those little lines are. He has oversized leather gloves because I just think that really increases cartoon aspect. His neck piece is more tattered because that's how he is. That's the kind of stuff we have. Dante has the coolest leather trench coat thing that you can think of, and under that is just like he's a dude. So he's just kind of like an exaggerated dude. We have stuff, this Korean sword type character. Headband, it's one of the most classic martial arts things any of us can think of. The fur lining on the coat makes him feel more like a experienced outdoor hunter character. So stuff like that really helps. Another thing to consider is that clothing follows and shouldn't confuse anatomy, which this gets a little interesting depending on what art style you're going for. And again, cause that's why I'm going over these broad terms, because it's doesn't matter how I do it. Understand what you want to draw. But 9 times out of 10, clothing should not obscure the anatomy unless you're trying to unless your clothing is them putting on a costume to obscure themselves. But again, that's a character design choice. So,
can I make a counter argument for that? If you want the clothing to obscure anatomy, you can do that in a way that emphasizes like how short or small the character is.
So my counterpoint then would be, it's still not obscuring it. It still follows the anatomy, and it shouldn't make the anatomy confusing, would be what I would say. So if you're drawing baggy clothing, and this is probably one of the things most people are asking about when they're asking how to draw clothing on characters, is fabric doesn't just bunch up and defy gravity. A baggy hoodie, for instance, here, this is where I can do this is why I have Clip Studio open.
Boop. Yeah.
So if I'm drawing, let's just cover up Rengoku right now. So I have a character, we'll call her Susan. Sorry, this is gonna annoy me if I let this move away. Let's use G-Pen. So let's just have squat little Susan over here. So that's Susan. Say hi, Susan.
Hello.
There we go. Thank you. So if I want to give Susan a big baggy hoodie, for instance, some people may draw it like this, which isn't necessarily wrong, but if you're looking at the clothing on top of the character, it doesn't make sense, right?
Right.
It's literally pushed out from their frame, and that's not how life works. So instead, I would recommend this. The one tip I feel kind of comfortable in giving you when it comes to drawing clothing is start with it resting. Now, it will bunch up. You'll have tufts that sit up above things, but it's mainly gravity and how it sits on the body, which is what you were saying. Look at fashion, look at Met Gala, look at real things to understand where things bunch up. Think about, waistbands are a thing. So it's probably going to it can poof out this way and this way, but it's going to come back in and bunch up over here. So we might get something akin to this. This is much more realistic, or at least easy to understand, than this. And you can, again, exaggerate this. I could take, and that's why one of the best exercises that I had teachers tell me to try was draw your basic character and literally start transforming them. I can do things like this to kind of play with how wide the character is and exaggerate it. I could even grab everything and have it go below the waistline.
That's a fun shape.
And this is one of those things where like art and fun character designs and fun stories is going to come from the constraints of thinking about what reality is like. So again, it's just considering how it falls in the body. So it may obscure anatomy, but don't use it to make wrong anatomy, or at least wrong anatomy in reference to how your art style is. You know, because anatomy helps. It's how we understand and process humanoid physical beings. Another thing to think about, and this is where I don't do very great at, is texture. I can't say one texture is going to be how all clothing is, though. Again, it depends on so many things. Gambesons are going to be fluffy. Leather is a kind of smooth thing, but there's even a texture on leather, and there's different types of leathers. Trench coats and like stitching you can consider. Fur type textures. The biggest thing that I would kind of recommend is translate your texture based on your outline. So when I do fur, I often throw in these little like extra shapes onto the main shape. I try to kind of obscure it. I can then go in, if I do a shape kind of like this, and I really want to read fur, throw in a few more little zigzags. And that alone starts to kind of convey something. It's not great. It's not how a real artist would do it, quote unquote, but it gets you somewhere. You can also think about your highlights. Smoother or glossier things have more highlight to them. So that's another thing you can do to try to portray that, is in the shading. But there's endless ways to do texture. So just know that if you're trying to talk about clothing, clothing has texture that is different from skin. Shading can be detailed or real, or has some fun ways to stylize overlap. So like I said, shading, it's a way to translate texture. Just how you shade is how you shade. I'm not going to get into that. You can see a few different things that we do here, but it's less about here's how you do clothing. It's more about understand lighting and how to shade forms. Overlap is the one thing that I will personally say is how I do it.
Yeah.
And it's basically just that. I like overlap when drawing clothes because that's what happens. I mean, clothing in itself is overlapping on the body. So, and this again, even this though comes down to how do you like to do things. Gendy Tartakovsky and art styles like that are kind of smooth. They don't show overlap as much because it's a very flat style, but it's expressive in that way.
Yeah.
Something like Mike Mignola is still a very stylized and graphic style, but I would say it very much emphasizes elements of overlap. And then you get into traditional anime or Disney films, and they're all going to show that in different ways. But most clothing, the more clothing you have on, means more overlap, and so you have a lot of opportunities to show depth. So Rengoku here, for instance, his cape is nothing but an excuse to have fun, crazy shadows to me. And the pants, they have a little bit baggy to them. So you want to have, literally, as the knee bends, show the overlap there. The cape is overlapping over itself, and the character is overlapping over the cape. So I wanted to emphasize that little area there. Same with Dante. He has a similar thing going on, except even more. He has his little rolled up. I need a different color for this. He has his sleeve rolled up, so you see the overlap there. You have the overlap between the arm and that. Overlap for this, another overlap for the shirt, overlapping the face. all of this part is overlapping this part. You have the knee coming out. So it's just endless overlap. Same thing here. When I'm drawing this from the sketch phase, I can shade in this and do a lot to show how that's on top of this. I do a lot of characters with like capes and wavy coats because I like it. But those are my main.
Fun.
They're fun. Those are the main ideas that I have that I suggest keeping in consideration when drawing clothing. Is really most of the stuff you should consider when you're drawing anyway, but consider how it is part of the character design, but also a separate element from the character itself. Like I said, make it clear that it is different than just the character. It's not just a t-shirt sleeve tightly to the body, one line. Throw a little bit on there. Consider gravity and folds, which there's a lot of great tutorials there. Maybe I'll link some. Funny enough, Ace of Clay, I think is actually a really good channel to look at.
Yeah.
He sculpts clothing and folds. He's going over how to do it in clay, but if you look at it and study it, he reproduces different textures in clothing really well. Mikey Mega, who is a bit of a saucy artist, has a great couple tutorials on, I believe, hoods, cloaks, and a few different clothing ideas, and he does like the tightly fitting stuff that kind of like isn't how clothes work.
Yeah.
But he also does some where it's like, okay, here's how real fabric works, though.
Mm.
And that's the thing, you can do it. It doesn't have to be realistic, especially if you're drawing cartoons and anime. There are a few visual shortcuts that most audiences accept and roll with, but then there are some things that are we need that to catch on. And if you do it realistically, then it's going to look that much better to a lot of people, actually. So we have that. Ace wanted me to do an example. It's not the best piece, and it's not super relevant, but it is a fun little hit cam showpiece that will go into a few of the ideas here. So we'll see you on Time-Lapse Corner.
Woohoo!
So first thing is, this is a little bit of a panel from a comic that we want to do. Basically, the idea is that Tonfa was training Flopsy after he kind of got his butt kicked because Tonfa is small, but she knows martial arts.
Mighty Monk.
Yeah, she's like, dude, you so big. Imagine if you just knew what you were doing. So, most of the comic is actually just going to be her beating the snot out of the big barbarian. But there's a niceness that comes in when, you're sparring like that, but, you feel safe. It's a consensual thing is kind of the play up there. Which, if people want me to talk about my feelings on consensual sparring and consensual violence, then I can sometimes.
That's the key word, consensual.
Dude, consent might be important. I know not everyone agrees with me on that. I know I'm taking a really controversial stance there, but
it is very important.
Well, no one asked you.
Sweetie.
So, now, I had a hard time choosing what to draw for this clothing focus piece, because Flopsy is half naked. But I heard her breath. You want to say a thing?
Well, the thing is, what you did right with Flopsy is the way that his kilt drapes down over.
I did this whole tutorial for that one part of the drawing.
The courtesy drape over the crotch, because a lot of anime, even though it's for the point of fan service, they don't do that. But, and the physics of that bother me.
Well, so even that, that is a point of, are they doing it wrong? Sure, it's not realistic, but it is a choice for what the point of the shot is.
Yeah.
No, I don't think very many people are looking at Flopsy going, I want that big furry dick.
You may never know.
I mean, I know. I'll let fan artists do that if they wanna. But so yes, there's a little bit of physics there, but the bigger thing is that Flopsy, he's covered in fur for the most part. So there is, like I was saying, texture, how you do that, and I try to so there's fur texture. I want to throw in a few beads of sweat, in which I like to do the tactic where the sweat kind of breaks through the main silhouette and drips from the main shape.
You know what I just realized?
No, what did you just realize?
If Flopsy's sweating, his fur would be much more matted.
Yeah. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I don't know how to draw matted texture.
Hindsight is 2020.
No. So again, this is coming down to the choices that you're making. So I want it to feel half like fur, but half just like he's naked. So There's
I mean, true. He is an abomination.
there's lines that you get to ride with that. If I wanted to be fully realistic, there's a lot of things I would do differently. But I simplify his chin to a flat line when he's happy like this. I do. There's all sorts of things that we play with here. And then, Tonfa is going to be a lot more clothing. But the way she's sitting, most of her clothing is covered up by her pants because her pants are kind of her big shape. But I really hope, that when people look at this, they can see her, they can read the pose through those big shapes. And if you do that, to me, that's the first primary big thing, because I've always said you can do great shading. It won't save a bad pose. But good shading on a good pose really helps. So
You did a lot of draping clothes on that shot, I just realized.
I mean, it was supposed to be a clothes tutorial, so I really tried to hammer the idea home. I also used a new Clip Studio pen here. It's the Good Pen. I'm thinking about making starting to do a series of shorts where I do mini reviews on different Clip Studio tools, primarily pens and stuff that you can download. But maybe I'll even do a review on the lasso tool just to be funny. What do you think, Ace? That's something that we should.
That would be funny. That would be very funny.
Because I've been using the G Pen a lot because it's my good flat thing, but I really liked using the little subtle texture and the way that the pressure sensitivity worked on this one.
Circling back to the draping clothes, I want to add that that is very important to look at the different types of folds into the clothing.
Yes.
So the drapes, the way that the arm folds and the
how it bunches up when you fold your arm or your knee.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite things to do. Because it's the same way I treat my anatomy. Really, I always try to show that little crease on a side of it whenever I have a forearm or a bicep bend in. Because again, to me, the biggest thing is just illustrating that overlap, because that's what makes things lively. I think once you get your basics down, having things bend and go in front of each other is how you make things really feel realistic, I think.
Yeah.
I really try to do that with her big poofy sleeve, which can be a hard shape to really understand, because again, when you think about it, it's just a big rectangle kind of coming out of her. But then when you bend it in, there's a lot that you can play with, and if you try to simplify it too much, it feels weird. If you try to throw too much on it, too many folds and wrinkles, is just bad. My trick that I like to go for is kind of like we were just saying, focus them on the joints. If there's a joint, there's folds and wrinkles, because that's just where it's literally folding up on itself. Think about where it's hanging off of. So if it's hanging off what's the highest point of the limb, have your folds go from that. Yeah, and when you're designing clothing, contrast, color, and value variation, obviously. But again, this isn't stuff that's specific with clothing. This is how to draw. So.
Yep.
Yeah, now I'm just flatting in, trying to catch everything. But yeah, just make stuff that is expressive. All the draping and all this really helps just make it feel kind of relaxing, I think. You're chilled out, you're finally not moving. And that's kind of
Your limbs are tired from the exercise.
Yeah. She can't hold her bottle up straight.
Oh, I didn't notice that. That was a nice detail, though.
She just drank out of it. There's a little droplet coming out of the water. And again, that's the big thing in this piece, is that this is one of the first times Flopsy has been able to fight. Because it's what he does. It's what he's good at, and he knows that. But this is one of the first times that he got to fight and be friends with the person afterwards, And it's this really weird dichotomy, because obviously if you get a punch thrown at you from a bully, it's bad. But with Tonfa, her offering the water, this moment after, because a fight only lasts for so long, training only lasts for so long. You have oftentimes more memories of going out afterwards, getting ice cream, or just both of you feeling like crap together. So
there's the sense of camaraderie in that, which is nice to see.
So I hope I captured that here. Maybe I should have put more of a shocked expression on Flaps. He was like, "Wow, friends are cool."
I think you captured it well to me.
I want to be better. I want to be better.
No, you're doing great, sweetie.
So yeah, this will go up on our Patreon eventually. We're trying to play with kind of a backlog of stuff, but this piece will go up on our Patreon as a print. I hope to make it a downloadable thing at some point. You will have the PSD go up on Patreon in the next month or two, and along with that will be a coloring book version of this, which we will hopefully make a full coloring book here soon-ish. I don't know about soon. It'll be a thing.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. There's a Patreon now. We've announced our comic book. I don't know when it's coming out in reference of time in all this, because we're trying to record ahead of time. But the Monster Log book, the Lindenville Guardsman Journal, will be coming out soon. You should be able to get it digitally on our Patreon, and we'll try to find a way to we'll bring it to different shows and sell it physically. Ace, say something nice to the kids.
Be safe.